Storyhinge, Episode 64. Margot Leitman, The Power of Live Storytelling.
Through a combination of live performing and touring and teaching and writing, that I was able to create a career. But there was so much doubt at first because this was an unknown career. Like, I'm a storyteller and I teach people how to tell stories, and I write and perform stories for a living. And that's a made up job. It really is. What I knew I was on the right path is just like things would fall, they wouldn't fall into place, and then they would.
Welcome to Storyhinge, where we unfold more meaning and value in everyone's personal story. At Storyhinge, we explore foundational ideas and beliefs through diverse personal stories in order to discover more meaningful paths, greater happiness, and accelerated growth in one's life. We believe everyone has a beautiful story to grow. Now here's your host, Jason Vidaurri.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Storyhinge. So excited you're here and taking time to be with us. By way of announcement, I want to take a little time before we get into the interview to make a few announcements, share a few thoughts. One thing that's been coming up pretty much with every single guest here in Season 2 as we were examining deeper into personal story is the power of writing out that story, or even parts of your own story. There seems to be something so maybe essential about it, to put your story into words that you can see and then you can look at again and reflect upon them. And it seems to just drive more meaning, more value into your own story. So if that's something that you're wondering on what you could do, I think that's probably a first step, is to start writing, parts of your story. I know I've done that. I'm taking different little stories in my life and trying to create little narratives about them and looking at them in different ways and seeing if I see something different in them. And I'll continue to do that and share what I find. Another thing that's been pretty phenomenal to me is the whole live storytelling growth that's been going on, and through events like the Moth or multiple other types of venues that are out there. We just heard last week from our guest, Nicole Stewart, who runs her own live storytelling company called Oral Fixation, and different things like that going on. And it's fascinating to me that here we are in 2018 now, and yet we are paying money, spending time just to go and hear personal stories of other people. And something that we've done for so long as humans and as a species, that was something we did by campfires for thousands of years. And so I think that speaks to a lack of that. Maybe that's human connection, being able to sit or be close to someone and see them face to face and hear their personal story, hear what they've learned, hear how they've grown, hear something of value that touches us, and we're able to feel that connection. So, I don't know where that goes exactly. Our guest today talks a little bit about that and some of her more recent enlightenments on how big live storytelling is going in really different formats of storytelling. That's exciting to hear about. One of the main functions of stories for humans is that through stories we get a sense of a life in a different place, or maybe better said, that we learn what a different situation might be like and how we could act in that. Or if we're feeling something similar, that we're hearing someone tell their story, it gives us hope and light and reassurance that we're not alone, that there's improvement and there's places to go. With that, I think that's enough said. Let's get on with our guest and our interview today. Today we have on in my mind, a true storyteller out there that's been telling live stories for several years, and we're going to talk about that. She has also written a great book on storytelling called Long Story Short, The Only Storytelling Guide You'll Ever Need, and has just wonderful advice and instruction on how to tell a story. I really see her as an influencer in the storytelling world, and out there also teaching others how to tell their story. So with that, Margot Leitman, welcome to Storyhinge.
Thank you, Jason. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and
good.
Just really excited to talk more about story. It's been a fascination for myself for many years, and really just, I guess, been more manifested in the last couple of years in my own life. I didn't go down any storytelling paths in terms of career or anything. I went down the engineering path and been an engineer for my whole career, and these past couple of years, I'm starting to explore in other areas. So it's exciting for me to talk to you.
Oh yeah, I've worked with a lot of engineers that do storytelling. It seems to be kind of a not as unusual a progression as you'd think. I've coached a lot of engineers that have an interest in this, and I've worked with a lot of people like tangentially in that field as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So
Yeah.
here at Storyhinge, we'd like to jump back in time a bit and hear some of those foundations in your own life, and I guess specifically with you, some of the foundations that led up to your storytelling. So why don't we go back a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, what led me to live storytelling specifically?
Yeah.
I didn't quite know that it was something that was possible to do. I was in my 20s living in New York. I graduated with a theater degree and was doing, live theater and such and things like that and acting and doing some stand-up. And none of that really felt like the right fit for me. I would have moderate success in that, but none of it felt like it. I don't know how to explain it. It was sort of like, well, I think a lot of people fall into the trap of, I have a degree in this, so this is what I'll pursue, and whether or not it's what you really want or not. So even though I had a degree in something very creative in theater, it didn't quite feel like the exact perfect fit for me. And then for me, the actual inciting incident that made me try and pursue storytelling was, I'm a big reader. I've always been a huge reader my whole life, and a huge reader of nonfiction. I've always just loved a true story or a memoir. And I was in a bookstore and I picked up this book by the writer Jonathan Ames called I Love You More Than You Know. And it was a memoir, and I read it and I thought it was just so, I just couldn't believe that a person would tell these true stories and put them on paper and be that vulnerable and open about their life story. And then I was at my parents' house a weekend or two after I read that book, and they had a manuscript from Spalding Gray on the bookshelf called Monster in a Box. And I picked that up and I read that in about a day. And between those two books that I read, I thought, could I possibly be this open and honest and tell these stories, but maybe not in a written form, but maybe on stage. And it was just that. It was just a matter of, and I can tell you so many people I know that have been inspired by reading a book and being like, I wonder if I could do this. But that's really how it happened. So it was probably like mid-late 20s, reading these books and saying, I wonder if I could just talk about my life in this way. And then I started using stand-up shows as a vehicle to tell true stories. And then from there, I started a storytelling show before that was really a thing. And I started it with my dear, dear friend, Julia Rossi. And the first one sold out, and there was a line around the block, and we turned people away. And I thought, we're onto something. People want to hear true stories. And then it evolved from there. But the big thing felt, it was like when I read those books, those felt like this was something I wanted to do with my life, was I wanted to be an open, honest writer and live performer. And I didn't know how to do that when I read those books. I didn't know it was possible.
Well, that's interesting in that, I think a lot of the audience are people kind of looking around to find something, to find that more that they're looking for. And for you, that it didn't happen right away. I want to hear a little bit more of that story. How did it take a number of years, number of days? How did that work? How'd you work through that?
Work through figuring out how to tell stories on stage once I realized I wanted to.
Yeah. Or even before that, like, because you went through acting.
Yeah. Well, I had pursued time, energy, and money, obviously, in college, in the fields of acting and stand-up. I mean, at this point, I had been doing stand-up for 6 years, and I had acting work, since I had graduated college. I really felt like I had put a lot of time and effort into training for this, and I was fairly good at it. And I felt like it was like a breakup for me. And I think with breakups, at times, it's really interesting when you break up with someone. It's really easy to break up with someone that cheats on you or throws a plate at your head or something like that, because you go, okay, I'm out. This is getting bad, But when a breakup is, when a relationship just doesn't feel right, it's kind of really hard to get out of that relationship when it just doesn't feel right, but it's not that bad, So that's what I was struggling with acting and stand-up, was that it was going fine. It just didn't light my fire. And I actually started having anxiety attacks before stand-up shows that I didn't want to go and I didn't want to do it. And I would try and do everything I could to get out of it, when meanwhile, I was so lucky to even be getting these spots. People would kill to have stage time. And so I started going to a therapist and talking to her about how I was feeling all this anxiety. And we eventually got to the root, which was that I was doing something that felt inauthentic to me. But the thing was that I was diving into the unknown. I wanted to do this thing with my life that wasn't really a thing. Imagine if like I'm no Mark Zuckerberg, but imagine if, years and years ago before Facebook, he said, I'm going to create, he described to you what he wanted to do with his life.
Yeah.
You go, well, that's not a thing. That's not a job that exists. You know what I mean? So that's what's happening with me was that I was saying, I want to figure out how to I want to tell true stories and make my living in that field. And everyone kept saying, but that's not a job.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
And they were saying, you have a job, you go on auditions, you perform stand-up, you tour colleges, you do these things, like you have a job that makes sense, that's been proven. So what is this made up job you want to do? And I just said, I really want to make it a thing. And the crazy part, Jason, is that once I made that decision, things fell into place really quickly. Like my live show started selling out. I started maybe about a year or two later, I opened a class in New York, and people wanted to take a class on how to tell stories. And from that, I created this whole curriculum, and with levels 1, 2, and 3 that people started taking. And I built a business from that, from not only, telling stories, but teaching stories. And then I thought, if this all started with books, I want to try and write a memoir. And that was just a horrible comedy of errors to get that published. It took years. I mean, I was a nobody knew who I was. And I eventually got an agent, and that agent let me go because he just didn't believe in what I was creating. And I had to find a new agent, which was a whole process. And then my book went out, and it just took years to get it published. There was a point that my agent called me and said, my first book, not my second book. My first book is a memoir called Gawky, Tales of an Extra Long Awkward Phase, not the book I wrote about storytelling. But that first book, it was, she eventually called me and said, we've gone to every publisher we can. Everyone said no. I'm sorry. I think you're just going to have to let it go. I don't think we can sell it. And I cried and I mourned it. And then about 2 weeks later, she called me and said, a publisher changed their mind. They'd like to publish it. And it was crazy. So it was like every time I thought I couldn't do it, I could. And I just kept forging ahead and creating this job that, through a combination of live performing and touring and teaching and writing, that I was able to create a career. But there was so much doubt at first because this was an unknown career. Like I'm a storyteller and I teach people how to tell stories, and I write and perform stories for a living. And that's a made up job. It really is. But I can't believe what I knew I was on the right path is just like things they wouldn't fall into place, and then they would. And for me, that gave me a belief that I was on the right path. Sometimes things are really hard, and maybe they're really hard for a reason, because maybe that's not the right fit for you. And this was hard in some ways, but so many signs pointed to that I was on the right path that I just stuck with it.
What was some of that? Because I'm curious as you're saying that, because you're pushing through on this one, whereas your stand-up comedy it sounds like you wouldn't have pushed through with all this. Or
yeah,
maybe did for some time anyway. But how did you start to decipher? Hey, this is really something I want to do, even though it's maybe not really exist as a career out there yet. But I'm willing to keep taking that next step, and keep trying.
It's interesting. I think back in this moment, when I was doing stand-up at the time, and I was at my boyfriend at the time's house, and he had a friend over who also did stand-up. And this friend was watching a stand-up comedy special of someone. I think it was Richard Pryor, I'm not sure. And it was ending as I got there. And my boyfriend's friend said, oh, you've seen this, right, Margot? And I was like, no, I haven't. And now I haven't. It was a great special. But he said, well, don't you watch stand-up comedy specials all the time? Isn't this what you want to be doing? And I said, I don't watch stand-up comedy specials all the time. And it was this weird thing of like, if I really wanted to be doing this, why wasn't I consuming and learning as much as I could? And then I thought, what I'm doing? I'm reading people's memoirs, and I'm taking writing classes in personal essay writing and writing from personal experience were the type of classes I was taking. I wasn't taking stand-up classes, and I was taking all of these things that were, again, like sort of related to storytelling. And I didn't even know that's what I was doing in my spare time while I was doing stand-up. Sorry, Jason, I forget what your actual question was, but that was a moment for me that I thought, maybe I don't love this, But what was your actual question? I'm sorry.
No, you're right on there. I was basically trying to understand with the clarity. How did you get more clarity that storytelling was what you should follow instead versus like comedy or some of the other things that you're doing? And I think you're just nailing it right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, it's like when I started telling stories and teaching other people how to tell stories, I noticed a real difference in my life and in my relationships. And I noticed a difference in the people's lives that were taking classes with me. I would teach a class in storytelling, and then I would get a letter from an email from a student after saying, this class made me realize, what I really want in my life, and I've decided to get sober. Or this class made me realize what I really want in my life, and I've decided to take the plunge, and I'm going to move to North Carolina, or whatever that is. Like, I just kept getting people saying, or I kept seeing people in class make decisions in their own life and come to clarity about things just from telling their own stories. And I just thought, like, this is kind of unbelievable that when you start sharing your story and connecting with people, you start making changes and start going for things. And I was doing the same as well. So it just feels like it was a calling in a way. That, and I just look now and I'm like, aside from meeting my husband, who I didn't meet through anything having to do with storytelling, but literally everything else I have in my life that's good is because I started telling stories somehow indirectly. It's like a friendship I made, I have every babysitter I've ever had for my children is someone that took a class with me in storytelling. Almost every place I have visited since, in the last 12 years since I've done storytelling has been because I've been sent there to do some sort of storytelling gig, and I've gotten to see the world. I just think about all of these amazing things I've had in my life, and it's all from that. And I wonder, I didn't have those things before I told stories. I did them. And I think people find it refreshing, especially in LA. People are very, very, what's the word? We're very, everything's fine, like perfect here. And I find that when I am that open, actually, people respond in that same way, and they mirror that.
That's wonderful. I guess I want to ask you just this maybe very basic question is, what is a story to you, and what do you think makes your storytelling unique?
Well, story to me is something with a beginning, middle, and an end that or affected me in some way, that I'm over. And that's a story that I would tell on stage. And what was the second?
I'll say, in your own storytelling, what do you view yourself as unique in your own storytelling?
I think that as I'm getting older, I realize that I am a person that is deeply affected by many things in a way that I think a lot of people would just brush off. I seem to have, things penetrate me a little bit more way. Like I look at things and I have kind of a heavier effect from them than a lot of people I've noticed that brush stuff off. And sometimes that's really hard to live with in that way. I think the word is empathic, like I feel a lot of things very deeply. And I think for a lot of people that's good in life, I think it's easier in life to let things forget about things and to just not have them affect you. But in terms of for what I do in my art, I think it's a good thing that I am very, very, very deeply affected by small things. And so because I can be deeply affected by small things, my stories soar in that way because I have a lot of feeling in what I talk about. And the other thing that I think makes my storytelling unique, and I think it also makes me a little bit creepy, is that I have a very strange memory. I don't have like a photographic memory by any means, but I have a really good memory. I remember things that I shouldn't remember. I remember details about other people. I remember moments. I'm basically like a fact-checking device for my friends about things. But I do think that is a real asset, that I have this super great memory in storytelling, because I can pull things and I remember so many details that most people would forget, which I do think is a very unique quality. And sometimes it really creeps people out that I remember really, really small things from their life, but I do. Yeah.
No, I've seen a lot of your stories and you're telling them, and they are very detailed, and they are, I guess another thing I noticed about them is they're very open. Like you're talking about when you read these memoirs, it sounds like that was like, hey, can I do this too? And I see that very much in your storytelling.
Oh, thank you.
How do you get to that point from being not open to being really vulnerable and telling those stories that you do?
I think it was a natural jump. I think a lot of it was helpful to take a few of those writing classes that I took when I was trying to make this transition. I almost went to grad school, actually, at that point for something in writing, and I wasn't sure. And I just started experimenting and just, with like bartending, and then using my bartending money to take a class in narrative fiction or in memoir writing. And I think those, and with my help of my teachers, and writing essays first that would be just to be written and for no one to ever see or be published or to be told on stage. These were just essays personal essays that I was writing for class that only the class would see. I think that was very freeing to write from a place of no one will ever see this but the couple people in my class. And if you want someone else to see it, that's fine, but just write for the sake of writing. And I think that helped me be vulnerable. But it was interesting because I was on the fence because I almost went and did the whole grad school thing at that point to just try and make this transition. And I found that I learned what I needed to learn from those classes that I took. And I had really great teachers in New York.
That's cool. That's really cool. I guess you hit some of this already, but I want to ask this maybe a little deeper. What has your own storytelling done for you? I guess on a personal level in your own life, now that you've been involved in telling your own story a lot and helping other people tell theirs.
I think that it's opened me up to an entire world of people that I didn't imagine there were this many people that wanted to also do this. So it's opened me up in that way. I mean, I had a really amazing experience this past fall where I got to go to Mumbai and perform in the Spoken Festival in Mumbai, which was a spoken word festival. It was the first one ever. And it had poets and musicians and storytellers like me telling personal stories. It had storytellers, the other type of storytelling, more folklore storytelling. I just remember standing at this festival after I performed in Mumbai and looking out, and there was 2,000 people in the audience. It's the biggest crowd I'd ever performed for. And I just thought, my God, telling stories got me here. I just got a free trip to Mumbai, a place I never thought I'd see in a million years, got to connect with a whole other culture of storytellers. And this is unbelievable that there are 2,000 people here just to hear people talk. And that was a moment for me that I thought, this is bigger than I thought it was. The amount of people that love this, that care about this, is bigger than I thought. And I think that was a moment that I thought, and I'm in a position now because I do a lot of writing besides storytelling. I've written for television and I've written a few made-for-TV movies and such. And so, I do that as well. And I'm in a position now where I love writing, any form of writing. But I'm wondering, do I have time to do both, or do I need to figure out to do one more than the other, or will I be able to keep both of these in my life right now? Because I realized this year that storytelling is bigger than I thought it was. And that's something I'm thinking about right now, although I am, right now I am still pursuing other types of writing as well.
Okay. What do you think it is about that? Because I've had this conversation with other people and the idea that, storytelling for humans is so ancient. We've been doing this since the beginning, before a lot of other things that we do. And now here we are in our modern society, we're willing to pay money to go hear people tell stories, something we would have done around the fireplace, thousands of years ago. And now we're willing to pay for it. What do you think that phenomenon is that it is as big as you've observed at the Spoken Fest?
We are really hurting for human connection right now. I think that all of the ways that we think that we are connected via technology is probably making us slightly more disconnected in the long run. In a way, I think that we think we're connecting, and sometimes we are, and there's some great things that happen from all of that. But there's also a lack of seeing a person in person. Like I heard people say, "Oh, I don't need to go to my high school reunion because there's Facebook," for example. So like that's technology taking the place of an actual physical human connection. So I think that may be part of it, that we're looking for more of a human connection.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. You've also been on the opportunity to teach people about story. Do you have a story about that kind of helps us understand what that is like for you and to illustrates what the experience is to teach someone how to tell a story?
Uh, it's amazing. I mean, I think I discovered that I can teach most people how to tell a story. It's a really almost foolproof thing. I have people come in there and you'd never believe, where they're at when they start the class. And by the time they leave, they're in amazing shape to tell a story. So what I love and what I find it so inspiring is that storytelling is something that really can be taught. You can really be taught to properly tell a story. Whereas when I was in theater school, I studied a lot of dance. And I think you can teach a person to dance better, but there's a lot of natural ability that starts with that, right? Like some people are naturally good dancers and some people aren't, do you know what I mean? And so with storytelling, you can come in and be the shyest person in the world, but if you have the tools, you can do it well. And in fact, a lot of shy people make great storytellers. So for me, what I think is so great about teaching is that I think that almost anyone with the right tools can tell a story properly. And that's what's so great. And it's like being funny. You can't teach someone how to be funny. You can give them tools, but you're kind of not, just like dance. You kind of have rhythm or you don't. But with storytelling, you can tell a story. You don't need to have an underlying skill underneath that. You can do it. You just need the right tools.
That's good. It kind of makes sense in a way that if this is something that's so ancient for us and it was such a part of our us becoming human, that we all had that, we held that ability, and even though if we don't use it very much in our current society.
Yeah.
If you had one or just a few pieces of advice to give someone in storytelling, what would that be? What would you tell someone that would say, I want to be a better storyteller? What would that be? I know in your book you have a ton of stuff.
Yeah, I know it's a long book. In terms of telling stories for the stage, true stories for the stage, again, I don't know much about the folklore storytelling that people love to do as well. But in terms of telling a true story from your life, for the sake of performing it, I would say keep it true. This is something that people ask me a lot. Does it have to be true? Yeah, it does. The audience will kind of ripped off, I guess, if it's not true, if they've been told something that was marketed as true and then wasn't. Also, tell your story, be the star of your story. I think a lot of people want to tell the story of, this amazing thing that happened to their grandmother, but you really should be at the center point of your story. So if you can't figure out a way to insert yourself in there to make yourself the star of that, then it doesn't really work. So make sure it's your story. A big one is to tell a story with a clean conscience, meaning that tell your story, and if you want to have another person involved in your story, which is fine, as long as that story is true and about you, and you change names and identifying characteristics of the other person, I think it's fine. But I think a lot of people maybe they have a bad breakup and they want to get on stage and bash their ex-girlfriend for 10 minutes. That's not really a story, you know what I mean? And you're not really telling it with a clean conscience. So, you have to have, and again, this is another tip, which would be to be over it. You've really got to be over it in order to tell a story. So the story about this ex-girlfriend of yours that cheated on you and you want to get on stage and rant about how much you hate her, you're not really over it, right? What you want to do is a year later or however long it takes you to get over it, get back there and talk about maybe all of these warning signs that you missed and what a fool you were. So it's like, again, you're the center of this. And I'm not saying that it's your fault that your girlfriend cheats on you. That's not what I mean at all. But I'm just saying, tell it from your perspective. So again, it's not about bashing someone's name. Tell it with a clean conscience and definitely be over it. And then a big one is, I would say, don't be too cool to care about what you're talking about. Yes, you need to be over it, but you also need to be vulnerable in your story and flawed. And I think that's a big thing. I think a lot of people are afraid to show any vulnerability. And then once you do that, it opens up a lot of doors for people to be on your side in your story, but people just get really scared to do that.
Yeah, that's I've been fascinated about that idea too. It's if you put too cool or too perfect over front, no one wants to hear that story. That person bores you. You're like, yeah, this person's not being real with me.
But I think we're programmed to do that, like in a job interview. We are, when they say, what's your biggest strength? What's your biggest flaw? And, I've done this. I've said, my biggest strength is I'm a hard worker. My biggest flaw is I stay at work too late. Things like that. Like we put ourselves so flawless in job interviews or in the business world that it's hard to switch gears and be flawed. And that's a very challenging thing for a lot of people. But if you don't have that in there, if you are too cool, I just don't know how we can root for you.
Yeah. And I guess as you do show that flaw, what is that experience like?
Well, I'll tell you, I was teaching a class, and a person in the class, like many people, was struggling with depression and talked about it in a story. And I'm not saying this is a flaw. I'm just saying this person was vulnerable, right? And talked about this person, discussed their depression, and discussed how they had just decided to go on antidepressants, and discussed which antidepressant that he had just gone on, and was just discussing this in a way of that they were trying. And then also a person that from the class realized that they wanted to start treating this. It was actually during the storytelling class that this person had this realization, which happens all the time. Like I said at the beginning of our interview, people have realizations about their own lives while they're taking a class with me. So, and it was really beautiful how open he was, and I was really impressed that he was and trying to do something about it. And then before he sat down, 2 people in the class raised their hand and said, I was on that drug for a period. 2 people said, I took that same drug for a period, and it really helped me, and I want you to know, I've been there and I got through it, and you will too. It's like literally 2 people stopped to say that to him. And I was so moved. It was like this person was so vulnerable. And from his I'm like tearing up at it, from his vulnerability, 2 other people revealed theirs and said, hey, you're not alone. I've been there. It's okay. And isn't that the point of why we're all doing this,
Yeah. No, I think you're hitting right at the center of it all. And that's that. And I think we do crave this, that human connection of being, it's, I guess in my mind, it's a, hey, here's Jason. Here's really, truly Jason in his fullest self.
Yeah.
And it's have someone on the other side say, I see you, Jason, as your true self, and I'm connected with you.
Yes.
And you're okay the way you are. And
yes,
we're all okay together.
Yes, exactly. It was just a beautiful moment. It was just the most beautiful moment. I was so touched. And that night I was like, I'm so glad I do what I do. It means so much to me. I get such joy from this. I get such joy from seeing those connections between people. And I just think, if all of these people have jobs, I don't know if at their offices they would have revealed any of that. It's like you kind of need to be in the right setting to do that. So, so I think that I try not to be numb to those moments. I try to really feel them and to really be present when they happen, because they're really special. And I've had things like that happen many times in my classes or workshops, but I try to, let it sink in every time how big this is and how helpful it is for people. I just believe sharing stories helps others. I had a student tell a story. It was in one of my very advanced classes. And, he was at a very advanced level, and he constructed an amazing story. And it really helped me with something that I was personally going through when I heard his story. And I emailed him a day later to tell him that. And I said, I know this is weird hearing this from your teacher, but something you shared in your story is deeply parallel to something I'm going through in my own life. And I just wanted to thank you. Sharing stories helps others, and you actually helped your teacher this week. And he was so grateful. And I just have moments like that all the time, and I just love it.
That's cool. Yeah. No, that's when you talk about it that way, it's very much in why I got into this. And my audience knows somewhat, but I'll say real quickly that,
please,
a big thing that I went through about 4 years ago, I transitioned out of the Mormon faith. Mm-hmm. And that was difficult. I mean, it disrupted all the foundations of my life.
Yeah.
And part of the going through that and getting to better places was hearing people's stories from all walks of life and saying, well, what's your story? How do you find joy and happiness in your life? And just hearing those different stories and those ideas. And, I can't say some I didn't agree with. I was like, well, I wouldn't live that way, but I still value your story. Yeah. And over time, putting that together has given me a whole new foundation and a whole new view on life and the possibilities that are out there. So yeah, I think it's a real thing.
I completely agree. I love what you just said. I wouldn't live that way, but I still value that's your story. I love that quote.
Yeah. Something else you said in your book, and I really liked it, was that, or a suggestion or advice is that, if you want to be able to tell better stories, you can also live a life to where you have more stories or better stories happening to you.
Yeah.
I guess, how do you do that for your own life?
Well, first of all, I have 2 small children. So I have every excuse in the book to say, no, I can't. I mean, I have a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old. And So when I got this email about going to Mumbai, I think a lot of it is about being supported in that life mission. So for me, I get this email, would you like to come to Mumbai and tell stories and teach storytelling for, in October? I was like, oh my God. I mean, I think my baby was like 8 months old. I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? But I have to do this. I have to do this. I just feel like I have to see the world and see the stories, and hear the stories. And so I went to my husband and I showed him the email and I said, what do you think? And thank goodness I married someone that supports me in living my life for the story. And he said, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to figure out a way for you to do this. You have to. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I think one of the ways that we can live life for the story is to surround ourselves by people that support us in living our life for the story, and that can help us do that, and to not have, to any sort of toxic relationships, to diminish those and to keep the positive ones in your life and the supportive ones in your life. And I think that a lot of the ways that I can live my life for the story wouldn't be without the support that I have from others that want me to live my life this way and encourage that. So I think it's more just about surrounding yourself with the right people. And when opportunities come, I try to look at, how can I do this? How can I go? How can I, rather than immediately going, I can't. Because I think people do that a lot. Oh, I could never do blank. But you try to look at it as, how could you do blank? I mean, I know someone that says, oh, I could never go anywhere. I have a kid. I can't fly anywhere. I mean, and I have 2 kids and I fly all over the world with them. It's like, you're just starting with no. You're just saying, I can't because I'm worried my kid may act up on a plane. It's like, well, try to see, how could you do it? And so
Yeah.
that's where I start. I start from, how can I do this? And if I really, really can't, I get disappointed, but I tried,
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, no, that's pretty cool. And as you're telling that, I have this image of, I have 6 kids, so we've traveled with them, not a lot, but a little bit. And it may not go as smooth as you want, but you might get a story out of it, even if it doesn't.
Will get a story. You certainly will. You certainly will. I mean, 6 kids is much more expensive than 2, but yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Well, this has been really, really enjoyable to hear, talking about all this different stuff.
Oh, good.
I want to make sure people can connect with you if they want to and find your book. Where's the best place to do that?
Sure. So my book is called Long Story Short, The Only Storytelling Guide You'll Ever Need. It's published by Sasquatch Books. You can get it wherever books are sold, online or in bookstores. My first book is called Gawky, Tales of an Extra Long Awkward Phase, and that's a memoir. You can get that as well wherever you buy your books. I do have a new book coming out, but not until 2019, but it's going to be a sequel follow-up storytelling book, and it's called Tell Your Story, and it's going to be a workbook journal with exercises and prompts and places for you to write and continue working on your craft of storytelling. I'm really excited about that. And you can find me on my website, margotleitman.com. That's MargotLeitman.com, or at Twitter at that same handle, or on Instagram on that same handle, or Facebook.
Oh, great. And we'll have those links for sure on the website and the podcast. So
wonderful.
So they'll be there. As you've been in the storytelling area, where do you think it goes from here? And I think you've seen it grow in your time from a place where it's not even a career, no one does this, to, well, there's a lot of people doing this or in this area.
Yeah. I mean, I keep coming back to this Mumbai moment when I stood there looking at that audience in a place that I didn't even know there was a storytelling scene. I think going back to, like, why am because I write so much other material besides storytelling stuff. I'm like, wow, storytelling is getting bigger than I thought, and it's a hard balance to do both for me right now. Whereas before I could very easily balance. I think that where it's going from here, I think there's going to start to be more festivals like that, in terms of, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of things, like Bonnaroo or Coachella, like these big festivals that are music based.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to start seeing more things that are bigger scale things like this, but for live storytelling. I think there's going to start to be more household names in it, like there are in stand-up. I think that there'll probably be some transition to television with it. It's been really hard to transition it to television, as it is, with anything to do that. But I think it probably will eventually. And I just think it's going to get even bigger and bigger because I've been doing this maybe like 12 years. My first class had 4 people in it. My classes now sell out in a few hours. My book is a bestseller. You know, my second book, the one about storytelling, is a bestseller. My first book, the memoir, took me years to even get it published. You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like it's just now anything current is just, it gets bigger. It's just big, 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 big. And things at the beginning in those first few years, it was like developing a fan base for this. And now it's just so huge. I mean, if you look at The Moth, which is a nonprofit storytelling organization, they had a few cities at first. Now they're international that they do these storytelling shows. They produce these storytelling shows all over the world, and people are going. So I just think it's huge. I get an email a day from a person saying how my book helped them and changed them. I just got an email the other day from someone who teaches storytelling in prisons saying he's having the book instituted in California state prisons for prisoners to learn how to tell their stories. It's like there are avenues for this I never even thought of, you know, like that. Having it go to prisons, I never even thought of that as a possibility. And it's like, oh my God, it's going there now too. It's amazing. You know, so it's like all of these avenues, there's no downside in learning how to properly tell a story. And there's no downside in sharing your story. So people are doing this. I just think it's going to get bigger. I think it's going to be huge. I had a real aha moment this fall in Mumbai. I really did. I think that was the moment where I realized, oh my God, this is bigger than I ever thought it was. I really thought this was going to be like a little mom and pop show when I got there. I did not realize it was going to be the size of what it was, you know. And I wrote, I think I even have it right here. I wrote in a journal in that moment, just, you know, just saying I couldn't believe what this had become. Yeah.
That's cool. That's really exciting for me, and being kind of new to this. And I have done a little storytelling myself. I'm part of a storytelling guild just to be exposed
Really?
out there. Yeah, here in Houston, and really enjoy it. Just really enjoy that. And
I would love to come visit you guys sometime. Maybe when my second storytelling book comes out, I'll try and make Houston a stop on that tour. I would love to connect in person with your guild.
oh, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, we'll work that out.
Yeah.
And in your teaching, do you just teach locally there, or do you travel around and teach as well?
No, I travel all over the place. And that's also what's been so wild, you know? I mean, I traveled to Wyoming in November to Jackson Hole and taught a sold out workshop. And I was like, okay, everyone in Jackson Hole wants to tell stories. You know, I'm working right now at a skincare company, teaching them how to tell stories. It's like, you wouldn't believe where I go. And just everyone wants to learn how to tell a story properly. I went to speak to college professionals in Pennsylvania, taught them. I mean, I've been all over the place. I went to an engineering university, Jason.
Hey,
Yeah,
woo!
Olin College of Engineering. Do you know them?
No, I'm not aware of them, but
In Massachusetts. And I taught a bunch of engineers how to tell stories this summer. I spoke at a scientist convention. I mean, all over. That's just the past few months. I'm constantly traveling and teach. That's my favorite thing in the world, is to go to a random place, find the storytelling scene, teach them what I know, learn what they know, and connect with a whole new group of storytellers, and just have that in my world. It's just unbelievable. And that is my favorite thing in the world. Right now I'm talking to a group of Lutheran bishops that I might be teaching storytelling to in the fall. You know, I mean, it's unbelievable the type of people I connect with, all walks of life. It's just amazing. That's what I'm saying, is it's bigger than I thought, because I get invited to do these speaking gigs, and then I get there and the crowd that is there, I'm like, okay, I'm not a famous person. They're not coming to see me. They're coming to learn about storytelling, you know? And it's like, wow, this is huge. This is huge.
Yeah, no, I think you're tapping into that, and the story is so powerful for us humans. It just, when you hear a good story, you can't help but be part of that story. You're in that story with that person.
Absolutely.
And they tell that very good. You know, it's like reading a really good book or a good movie. You're not even in that theater. You're not even reading that book. You're not on the pages anymore. You're in there, feeling it and living it. And so, and I just love it on the personal level too. That's another question that's always or this weird feeling I've always had in my life, is this concept of, I've always lived my whole life just from being Jason, from being this one person. What does it really feel like to be someone else? And I get a taste of that by hearing a personal story. And I think that's part of my fascination with it. It's like, oh, I get an idea what it feels like to be someone else, to really live someone else's shoes. Okay, that's part of it, I think.
Yeah, I really get to understand other people's lives so much via my work. And it's so great. Or I get to understand other people's communities and how they live is also really interesting, because I've always lived I lived in New York City, and then I live in Los Angeles. I mean, and I've spent some time in other places, lived in there for shorter periods of time, but I've lived in a pretty urban lifestyle. So when I go to these small places and I hear the stories that they tell, it is like this fall I got to feel what it felt like to live in Wyoming by hearing people's stories. And that was great.
Woohoo! Yeah. I spent some time, I lived in Wyoming for 3 years, so woohoo for Wyoming.
Wyoming storytelling scene is amazing. I am dying to go back there.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, Margot, this has been a real fun ride here, talking to you about story and your storytelling, hearing about some of your experience. And I just want to say thank you for coming on and spending time with us.
Thank you, Jason. I'm so flattered that you asked me to be on your wonderful podcast.
Thank you for sharing with us at Storyhinge. We hope this time together has added more goodness to your journey. Until next time, onward and upward, and may your own story continue to grow more beautiful.